Previously, the Avatar was trapped in the world of Pagan, stranded there by the evil Guardian with seemingly no escape. However, against all odds, the Avatar was able to defeat the 4 elemental titans who controlled the powers of Pagan and channeled their energies to restore a Black Gate, a dimensional portal through which the Avatar was able to return to Britannia and was faced with a disturbing sight. The realization that the Guardian had already succeeded in his conquest of this world. This is the cliffhanger on which Ultima 8 ended on, and the world had to wait 5 years until 1999 to play the continuation of the story. Ultima 9 was faced with a very tumultuous development process and a fickle publisher whose priorities were constantly shifting. Originally, Ultima 9 was intended to use an improved version of the Ultima 8 engine, but due to the success of Ultima Online's beta, EA saw success in this new and exciting arena of massively multiplayer experience, shifting manpower and resources from the Ultima 9 team into Ultima Online. This obviously caused the game to be delayed and, as such, be completely and utterly outdated, causing Origin to restart development from practically scratch. But eventually, Ultima 9 was released and we did get a continuation of the Ultima saga. As you begin the game, you see the peaceful land of Britannia. Fields of wheat and sunny skies remind you of what you've been tasked to protect for numerous games so far, as a farmer pulls his cart through his farm. Suddenly, something happens, and the earth begins to tremble. A massive column bursts from the ground, and the pieces pushed up by the column fall into the ground, killing the farmer. After this mysterious scene, you're thrust into the game as the Avatar is woken up in his bed by a voice, calling upon you to journey to Britannia to defeat the Guardian for the last time. This is also the first sign of the many complaints many fans of the Ultima series have of this game, as you are now on Earth, even though the ending of Ultima 8 clearly ended back in Britannia, causing the entire sequence to feel out of place for those very invested in the Ultima storyline. In practice, this entire sequence is a tutorial and a part of the game design philosophy of Ultima 9. Due to the series being almost 20 years old at this point and the last game having come out 5 years earlier, it's clear the development had a strong focus in being welcoming to new players in many ways. Such as the game not requiring the player to read the manual, as practically everything you need to know is explained within the game itself. The disembodied voice revealed to be Hawkwind, also known as the Time Lord, who has been a part of Britannian events since Ultima 3, acts as your guide through the basic controls and functions of the game. The first major change from the previous games is that the world is now fully 3D and takes advantage of 3D FX, or direct 3D hardware acceleration. For the time, the game is actually pretty good looking, which of course didn't come without drawbacks. One issue with chasing the top of the line in technology was much more annoying to customers than it is now. Especially during the 90s, the technological development was so fast that practically every year introduced new games that just wouldn't work, or would work extremely poorly, with technology that was top of the line just a year before. Whereas now you can play almost every new game comfortably with components that are 2 to 3 generations old. Ultima 9 was no exception to this, and was extremely demanding to play, and also prone to crashing in many instances. This was the reason why I originally didn't play the game, despite getting a copy from a friend, as the game did run on my PC, but kept crashing so often that I just gave up on it. These days, it's a little bit better with the unofficial patch that is included with the GOG version and much faster hardware, making running the game much less of a chore. Movement works by either using the mouse or the keyboard. With a mouse you can move by pointing in a direction and pressing the right mouse button. This causes the avatar to walk in that direction. Using Ctrl or Alt in combination with the button sidesteps, and using both makes the avatar walk backwards. With a keyboard, the arrow keys correspond to these same actions, and turning is done exclusively with the mouse. Interacting with objects works by pointing the cursor at an object, and if the object is close enough, the cursor will be green, and you can attempt to interact with it with the left mouse button. Clicking the button will attempt the basic interaction, whether it's flipping a switch or eating a piece of food, while holding the mouse button attempts to move the object, at which point you can drag the object to a new location. This in some ways is similar to Ultima 8, as while you are moving an object, it is transparent, making placing the object easier than if it were completely opaque, with the exception that moving the object further away does not throw the object. A huge amount of objects in the game world are movable, and for the time, the interactivity of the environment is rather massive. Is it kinda pointless? Yes, but it's cool nonetheless. Dragging and dropping objects is also how you pick up and equip objects. By dragging an object onto the avatar will either equip that item or place it into your inventory. This is how you gather your basic gear from your home before embarking on your last adventure in Britannia. Due to the continuing focus on the interactivity of the environment and immersion, even containers in the game world now have the objects inside them, instead of containers being a separate menu. This obviously has its drawbacks, as examining a container in a 3D world can occasionally be difficult. Something that makes interacting with objects easier is the freehand mode, which allows you to toggle away from mouse look mode, and instead allows you to move the cursor freely on the screen. Doing so is important for things like interacting with the environment or moving things in and out of your hotbar, which makes its first appearance in Ultima. The hotbar acts as you'd expect. There are 12 slots, each corresponding to a function key on the keyboard, and placing items on the hotbar allows for a much faster access to those items, compared to having to open your inventory every time you wish to use an item. The inventory as well has changed, and is no longer a window where you freely place items in. Instead, your backpack is now a grid inventory, which might feel less immersive than a more free inventory system, but does mean the possibility of items being hidden by other items is no longer an issue in Ultima 9. When you receive bags and other such items, they work in a similar way, opening a new window shaped like a bag with a grid inventory inside it. The Avatar's house has some references to previous games, such as some of the art created by Denis Loubet as paintings on the walls, and also some very blatant EA property advertising.
EA Sports.
It's only a game. Why you have to be mad?
Including for things that never happened. The house is also littered with books that can be read. The book interface follows the immersive user interface philosophy, and actually looks like a book when you interact with one. You can turn the page by clicking on the corner of the page, and returning to the beginning by clicking the bookmark. Closing the book is done via either a right-click or using the escape button. Some of the books you can find are small tutorials in and of themselves, and some are merely set dressing. One of them is basically an in-game quick reference sheet for all the controls. This can be an important book to find, as unlike more modern games, or even many games released around the same time, Ultima 9 does not have a control configuration screen. The system menu of Ultima 9 also takes the form of a journal, which you must pick up before you can access it, and the interface works in a similar fashion as the other books in the game, with the exception that this book has many more interactable elements within it. One section of the settings book has the configurable options of the game, which are somewhat limited. You can customize things like the draw distance and the volume levels of different audio sources. Saving and loading is also done via this journal, and new pages are created as you save into more slots. As in Ultima 8, starting a new game is once more done via this interface, and the first save slot is reserved for restarting the game. In the journal is also a short synopsis of all the mainline games so far, which acts as a very basic explanation of the lore so far to new players. There is also a bestiary of the creatures you're likely to encounter during your travels in Britannia. Effectively, these sections of the journal replace the similar segments that were in the manuals for the earlier games, once more lessening the need to have a manual since more information is now contained within the game. Once you've collected all of your gear from the house, you can move into your yard, where some basic movement and combat training can take place. In the yard, you can find 2 weapons, a bow and a 2-handed sword. Equipping these works as mentioned previously, by dragging and dropping them onto the avatar. Arrows are placed into a combined pool which will be drained as you shoot. To fight, you have to enter combat mode, which can be done by pressing the tab button. In this mode, you can fire your bow by holding the left mouse button, aiming with a cursor, and then releasing the button. Fired arrows do not just immediately disappear, but stick in the place they hit for an extended duration of time. Fighting with a sword is very simple as well, and you just click the left mouse button to swing the weapon. The hitbox of the sword is larger than just the aiming cursor, and you need to be careful to avoid collateral damage. This is also where the usefulness of the hotbar becomes apparent, as you can also drag and drop weapons onto it, and quickly switch between weapons by pressing the appropriate function button. Further in the yard are also 2 boxes which can be used to practice the traversal mechanics of the game. As in Ultima 8, the avatar can climb over obstacles with the use of a climb button, and also jump. Jumping is similar to the patched version of Ultima 8, where you aim the cursor at the point where you wish to jump, and then press the jump button to execute that jump, ending up more or less where you aimed. Once you're done with learning the basic controls, it is time to unlock the gate and enter the national park within which the avatar's house is located for some reason. This part of the tutorial introduces the concept of swimming, which is relatively simple in execution. To swim, you just enter the water and move as you would on land. With the exception that looking up or down allows you to dive in the water, giving you proper 3-dimensional movement. Your oxygen supply is limited though, and too much time underwater will eventually kill you. In the park, you can also find several enemies to practice fighting with, but these enemies are weak and slightly out of place, considering you're supposed to be in a park on Earth, so they provide little to no actual danger. In case you manage to be poisoned, you can explore to find a cure poison potion from the park as well, which acts as a simple way for the game to show the players that exploration can be very beneficial. For returning players, basically all of these tutorial elements can be bypassed, and all you really need to do is collect all of your equipment and travel to the primary purpose of this area. A small wagon in which you can meet the familiar fortune teller who acted as the character creation system in Ultimas 4 through 6. Here she has the exact same purpose and works identically to her previous incarnations in the series, as she gives you a questionnaire based on the Britannian virtues. Your answers to these questions determine which character class you will start as, and each of the virtues is one small link to a specific character class. This follows what could be seen as a tradition of the Ultima series design philosophy, where in practice the whole system is extremely simple. If you wish to choose a specific character class, you just need to choose the options corresponding to the virtue. But that is kind of beside the point, as the primary idea of systems such as this is to make the player feel it's more meaningful and complex than it actually is, and I appreciate this kind of design philosophy. Having answered the questionnaire, a moon gate appears in the Ring of Stones, and the fortune teller sends you on your way, explaining how you will end up in Stonegate, where your journey will properly begin, and from where you can find class-appropriate equipment. Unfortunately, the Guardian seems aware of your impending return and sends a gazer through the gate to prevent you from entering. However, you swiftly defeat the weakened monster and travel through the gate, finally entering Britannia. Instead of Stonegate, you end up on a high plateau, where you witness the Guardian's fortress on Britannia before a knight riding on a dragon arrives. Having no weapon, the situation seems dire, and the knight commands his dragon to engulf you in flames. Then we see the Guardian's new minion, Lord Blackthorn, witnessing this scene via a magical mirror, exclaiming you've somehow disappeared. He clearly wants to have you killed, but the Guardian has other plans. Being an entity of pure evil, he does not merely want the avatar dead, but wishes to break his spirit first by letting you travel the lands, seeing what he has done to the land and the people of Britannia before finally putting you out of your misery. After this setup, you suddenly find yourself in Stonegate, with basically no explanation of how you got there. This is also, unfortunately, where more cracks in the game begin to show, which are in part result of a very difficult development process. Most of the cutscenes in the game were intended for a previous extended version of the game, making some of them feel kind of out of place. And that's because they are out of place. Being on a tight schedule and budget at this point, rendering completely new cutscenes would have delayed the game even more, so they took advantage of what they had and tried to fit the plot and cutscenes together as well as they could, which sometimes doesn't work as well as it could have. Stonegate itself is basically a second tutorial. In the room you ended up in, you can find a chest that contains a set of items that change depending on which character class you chose in the Virtue questionnaire. The bookshelves in this room also contain some lore books, including a little bit more history and another very useful book that's been seen in most Ultima games. The book that explains what each potion actually does. Each floor of Stonegate acts as a mini tutorial of a specific feature, mostly focusing on the new spell system. Once more, the avatar needs a spell book to cast spells, which is conveniently provided to you here. At a first glance, the book seems to be full of spells, all of which are divided into the classic 8 magical circles of the Ultima universe. This is, however, not the case, as the book only shows you the available spells, and whether you can cast them or not is denoted by the box next to each spell's name, all of which at this point are empty, with a few exceptions. For now, your spellcasting is limited to 4 utility spells that can be found at the beginning of the book. To cast the spell, you can click on the icon next to the spell and then aim the spell towards your chosen target. A more convenient way to cast the spells is by taking advantage of the hotbar and dragging the spell icons onto your chosen slot. This allows you to aim the spell in the regular view and then press the appropriate function key, which immediately causes the spell to be cast. As you move down the levels of Stonegate, you are required to learn the basic functions of each of these utility spells to proceed, starting with the Ignite spell, which, as the name implies, can be used to ignite sources of fire, such as torches on the walls. The other utility spells are Stone, which is a basic low-damage ranged attack spell, Douse, which is just as self-explanatory as the name implies, and Gust, which can be used to remotely push items, which also acts as a showcase of the physics systems of the game. Other things the Stonegate tutorial teaches are things like picking up and equipping gear, jumping, climbing, and how basic lever puzzles function in this game engine. Once you reach the lowest floor of Stonegate, you're almost ready to enter the world of Britannia, but even the courtyard of Stonegate has many features which act as small tutorials to the game's features. For example, the first thing you see as you open the front door is a small pond that has a treasure chest laying at the bottom. And if you wish to gain the precious gold within, you must learn how to use the swimming system of the game. The outside also has several basic enemies, which can be used as practice for the combat features of the game, also likely causing you damage, which can be healed with the potions found within Stonegate. Getting close to the exit of this area, the Guardian taunts you, explaining to the avatar his desire for the player to see the damage he's done to the world, while laughing gleefully in your face. Determined to thwart the Guardian and free Britannia from its oppressor, you move towards a teleporter but are stopped by an armored knight, one of whom you saw riding a dragon in the cutscene preceding the entry to Stonegate. This knight explains they are here to stop you, and they are a member of the Worm Guard led by Lord Blackthorn. Not much else is learned during this conversation, but it acts as a simple tutorial for the conversation system of the game. Finally, you fight the Worm Guard and enter the teleporter, which sends you directly into the castle of Lord British. You may wonder, why does it sound like Stonegate repeats many of the tutorials from the first segment? And the answer is, because it does. To me, it really feels like Stonegate was originally intended to be the tutorial, and the Earth tutorial was added later without then changing the Stonegate segment to compensate for the change of the flow of the game the creation of a new tutorial area caused. In the castle, you receive your first quest from Lord British himself. He tells you that the people of Britannia have been acting strangely ever since massive columns erupted from the ground, and sends you to investigate the source of these happenings, guiding you towards the dungeon Despise. Being able to talk to more people also showcases how the voice acting is not limited to some of the main characters, as it was in Ultima 8, but every single line of dialogue in the game now has a voice line corresponding to it. The quality of said voice acting is decent enough, but very variable.
How are you then? The name's Giovanni. I'm the blacksmith around here.
Greetings, my good fellow. I say, you look most familiar.
Including how there's no clear direction for what kind of accents people in Britannia should have.
I have heard all evidence. Does anyone have anything further to add?
Your Honor, I swear to you, I am innocent.
What is limited to certain characters, however, are facial animations. And most characters in the game have a static facial texture when engaged in dialogue. In the castle, you can also meet the gargoyle Vasagrilum, who tells you that similar effects have been observed in the gargoyles, and most of the gargoyle population has decided to distance themselves from the humans, who they now see as inferior and beneath them, and have moved into a domed city beneath the sea. To put insult into injury, the codex lens of the gargoyles has also been stolen, with no indication as to who took it and where. This part is also where some of the issues with the writing are very apparent. As the game is meant to be accessible to newer players as well, the game has many dialogue options clearly geared for this purpose. That in and of itself is not an issue, but the issue is how these questions were written, making the options feel somewhat strange to those who are already familiar with the series. Such as, why would the Avatar be confused about what the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom is, or not know who the gargoyles are, as they've played a major part in some of the adventures in Britannia? Thankfully for those who are not particularly happy with this, these optional dialogue options are not crucial to the plotline of the game and are easily avoidable. Exploring the castle more, you can find some items that will be helpful on the long journey ahead, and even the first trainer of the game. Training does not serve the same function that it did in earlier games, and instead of increasing your combat skills, learning from a trainer will instead unlock a new attack move for a specific weapon type. These special attacks can be used by pressing a modifier button, either Ctrl or Alt, while attacking with the weapon. Leaving the castle shows off a returning feature of the Ultima series, which was absent in Ultima 8. The world is once more open, and besides teleporting, there are rarely any loading pauses in the game. Instead, the world is loaded mostly in the background. Even if it might seem like a little thing these days, having an actually open 3D world was an extremely big deal when the game was released. And if not the first, Ultima 9 is one of the first 3D RPGs to take advantage of this kind of a background loading system. As examples, Might and Magic 7 was released the same year as Ultima 9, and the technological difference between the games is very apparent. 3 years after Ultima 9, The Elder Scrolls Morrowind was released, but even that doesn't have a completely open world, but things like buildings and dungeons are instanced and take place in separate maps into which you have to load into. In addition to the fascinating 3D engine, you may notice the world built within it seems quite lively. The city streets have people, wildlife, and a variety of ambient sounds to set the mood for a fantasy township. The skies are blue and the people seem to be living their lives quite normally, and the city of Britain does feel like a small medieval town. This is in stark contrast to the end of Ultima 8, where the skies were red and at first look Britannia seemed to be conquered by the Guardian. So if that is not the case, what was the Guardian taunting you about all this time? The answer comes in the form of the town mayor and his assistant. In the Grand Ultima lore, each major town of Britannia is dedicated to one of the 8 virtues, and Britain is the city of compassion. However, that seems not to be the case anymore, as the mayor has enacted a moderately popular decision of sending all the homeless, the sick and disabled into the town of Paws to clean up the city.
Why the weak and the sick and the others that were filling up the streets? We had no choice but to get rid of them. They were choking the life out of the city. Paws was the perfect place for them.
The people of Britain accept this solution as, why would those who work provide for those unable or unwilling to provide for themselves? The mayor's assistant, on the other hand, who even has the symbol of compassion hung upside down in his room, seems to have a hand in this decision. And considering his secret room full of guides on how to scam and steal, it seems like this assistant is not a man of good character. This paves the way for the main theme of Ultima 9, which is in many ways reminiscent of Ultima 5. The virtues of Britannia are being corrupted, though unlike in Ultima 5, not via legislation, but on a clearly deeper level, affecting the minds of the people somehow. Lord Blackthorn has returned, and he was the symbol of the major antagonists in Ultima 5, that of the Shadow Lords, who were based in Stonegate, where you first entered Britannia during this quest. Some may wonder, wait a minute, wasn't Lord Blackthorn reformed? There was a book in Serpent Isle talking about him learning to value good deeds in Monk Isle. And it's an understandable question. But on the other hand, the book was written from the perspective of the monk, talking about what he had taught Blackthorn. Nowhere in the book does it specifically say that Blackthorn actually learned something, and having been written as a very charismatic and deceptive character, it's very likely he was just playing along until the Guardian whisked him away from Serpent Isle to use him for his own purposes, promising him Britannia as a reward. Exploring more of Britain will reveal more of the state of the world and provide some clues as to the nature of the unfolding events. Several things seem to coincide with the appearance of the giant columns. The runes of the virtues were stolen from the museum in Britain and were never found. The strongholds of the three principles were destroyed by calamities around the same time, and the holy objects belonging to each principle were lost, and magic in Britannia has been broken, preventing anyone from binding new spells to their spellbooks. The museum itself is basically a showcase of fan service, meant to remind you of your past adventures with several items from the earlier games. The existence of some of these items is admittedly not possible within the canon of the series, but in the grand scheme of things is a minor issue. Despite things seeming dire, and most of the citizens seem to be supportive of this new state of the world, not everyone in this world has yet been affected by whatever force is causing people to act in the opposite way of the virtue they are meant to uphold. In Britain, there are also several shopkeepers with which you can trade with. The buying and selling interfaces take the shape of a contract, which in practice is a scrollable list of items. To buy or sell, you need to click the add and subtract icons next to each item you wish to transact with, which adds a tally of the total price of the transaction and how much gold you will have remaining afterwards. After being introduced to the kinds of changes you can expect as you journey through the world of Britannia, it is time to leave the confines of the city and travel towards the first dungeon of the game. To make your travels through the world slightly easier, you have been provided with an in-game map accessible via the backpack. Not only does the map show most of the important locations of the world, including shrines and the columns, if you have a sextant in your inventory, the map also shows your exact position on it. The world outside the walls can be dangerous, and some of the enemies you encounter may be too much for the avatar to handle, and as such, you may encounter death. Unlike in most Ultima games, Ultima 9 follows the footsteps of Ultima 8 by not having a resurrection system. This means that saving your game frequently is extremely important, since death is permanent. Thankfully, some aspects of the game are quite broken, allowing for some creative solutions for facing these tough enemies. The Road to Despise reveals even more about the state of the world. The keeper of the Shrine of Compassion explains that ever since the columns appeared, the shrines began to slowly decay, and no amount of maintenance was able to stop this from happening. Talking to her further, she also tells you the mantra of compassion, which is the same it has been ever since Ultima 4. The trek to the shrine introduces you to a returning companion, Shamino, who has been trapped in the spirit realm and requires your help to return to Britannia. He also reveals the true nature of the giant columns by explaining how the Guardian is using them to corrupt the virtues. Meditating at the shrine reveals even more details about your quest. The shrines have been corrupted by the Guardian's magic, and this corruption has spread to the people of Britannia, also corrupting their views of the virtues. The shrine explains to you how to cleanse the shrine by finding the corrupted runes of virtue embedded into the base of each pillar within the dungeons, and combining them with the sigils of the virtues at the shrine, which allows you to cleanse the shrine and reverse the corruption that is plaguing the land. Sigils are a new part of the lore and have never been seen before. In a way, they take the place of the stones of virtues, but just in a more interesting shape than just a colored stone. And for the most part, these physical symbols correspond to the symbols in the runes of the virtues. Also, at the latest, you will be introduced to another quite amazing feature of the engine. Ultima 9 features a real-time day-night cycle with somewhat dynamic lighting, and also a weather system. Even if all of this became almost a norm just a few years later, it is hard to explain how amazing these features were in the late 90s, in a fully 3D game of all things. Near Britain, you can also find Gwenno, an old companion and the wife of Iolo, who reveals to you that Iolo, and considering the fate of Shamino, possibly more of your companions have vanished. Reaching the dungeon, you can find the cart of the unfortunate farmer from the introduction video next to the giant column, and you can also see an interesting technical detail about the game engine. Despite the game working as if it is a completely open world, in practice it kind of isn't, and entering the dungeon in fact seems to teleport you to a new area as you pass a certain spot. The only real indications of this are the slight change in lighting and also a minor stutter as the new area loads. It's an interesting way to ensure the dungeons work as separate areas, giving more freedom to their design as you don't need to worry about whether the outside geometry overlaps with the dungeon, while still giving the player the experience of a completely open world. The dungeon itself is relatively simple, and in a sense yet another tutorial that eases you into how dungeons in the game work. Practically every room is a small puzzle that needs to be solved. As such, the dungeon teaches you that sometimes you need to climb things, or how you need to use items on the environment, shoot at objects, read clues to solve a puzzle, and so on. Another practically unmissable introduction is that of side objectives within the dungeons, as you can save a pair of people who have been banished from Britain, who came into disguise to search for a mythical treasure. Since you've freed them from their predicament, they decided to give you the information they've gathered and go back to their old life instead. Following this storyline as you progress through the dungeon will eventually lead you to a relatively simple puzzle room, solving which will give you a magical shield. You find the base of the column surrounded by lava, and a lone worm guard protecting the corrupted rune within. After a short battle, the worm guard yields and reveals they are in fact Iolo, your lost companion. This is a part of the Guardian's plan to break the Avatar spirit. Not only have the virtues and the people following them been corrupted, but some of your closest friends have now been corrupted as well, and are being used as guards in locations where you're sure to go. In my opinion, this is a pretty fascinating idea, using your old friends as enemy, making you consider how you could avoid killing them and find a way to eventually save them from their mental imprisonment. While Iolo is resisting the commands of the Guardian, you grab the rune and leave the dungeon, only to be ambushed by Lord Blackthorn himself. The situation seems dire until a rogue who calls herself Raven appears and kills the worm guard holding you, causing Lord Blackthorn to flee. She tells you her employer wants to see the Avatar, but only if you can prove yourself to truly be them. Thankfully, you're already on the quest to purify the runes, so this will be an easy task once you've finished with more pressing matters. Your next destination is the small town of Paws, a disease-ridden hovel located in the middle of a poisonous swamp, where all the poor and disabled of Britain have been exiled. Here you can complete side quests and save the mayor's daughter who was taken from their home as she did the most unthinkable thing. She got sick. Doing so allows you to finally receive the first sigil and restore the Shrine of Compassion to its former glory. This introduces the new character advancement system. As you have been completing quests in Britain, you may have noticed that nothing of note happens as you do so. Sometimes you may get a reward, but for the most part, absolutely nothing seems to have happened, other than a chime that has denoted a completion of a specific objective. This is because Ultima 9 does not have an experience system, and technically there are no character levels in the game. Therefore, instead of gathering experience, you gain more power by completing main quest objectives, specifically cleansing the shrines. Each time you cleanse a shrine, the spirits will give you a choice. Which of the 3 attributes would you like to raise? In this way, the game not only limits which places you can safely explore, but also completely removes the need to grind for experience, which was very prevalent and time-consuming in several of the older games, while also ensuring you have the opportunity to be at a specific level of strength at a specific point in the story. You may then ask, what's the point of side quests then? And for that, you gain an answer on the road to Pause, where a local fortune teller can explain to you the karma system, though she does it inaccurately. While her dialogue seems to imply the karma system in the game is very in-depth, in reality it's quite simple. Every time you do something good or bad, a different chime plays. This is the sound you've been hearing when completing side quests. The dialogue implies that the karma system affects your strength, the strength of the enemies, and the attitudes of the people in the world. But in reality, all that karma seems to affect is your maximum mana. So, being a good person will allow you to spam way more spells. The cleansing of the shrine also immediately changes some of the attitudes of the people living in the area, creating a nice concrete consequence of your actions within the game's world, and also finally unlocks the ability to bind spells into your spellbook, though only those in the first circle of spells. This follows the traditional symmetry of Britannia, where everything is linked together. There are 8 virtues, each of which has a shrine. There are also 8 circles of spells, so cleansing a shrine unlocks 1 circle of spells. Binding spells into your spellbooks is in some ways familiar, but also slightly new, and in a way is a combination of many other spell systems in previous games. First, you need to find a specific location to conduct the ritual of binding, similarly to how sorcery functioned in Ultima 8. Then you need a scroll to bind into the spellbook, like in Serpent Isle. Then you need specific reagents placed onto the ritual pentacle, once more, like in Ultima 8, after which you can complete the ritual by typing the incantation of the spell, which then binds the spell into your spellbook. After doing so, you can select the bound spell from your spellbook and cast it by expending a portion of your mana, which is dependent on the circle the spell belongs to. In the magic laboratory of Lord British's castle, you can also find a very important tool, the Potion Workshop, which allows you to take a magical reagent and an empty bottle and create a potion corresponding to the chosen reagent. This is very important since potions can be expensive and rare, and you do not passively regenerate mana. Instead, mana is restored primarily via the use of potions, and while sleeping. Thus, having a way of making potions yourself is an extremely useful feature. From this point onwards, the game follows a specific pattern. You end up in a new area, help the local population solve whatever problem their column is causing to get the sigil of the local virtue, enter the dungeon of the anti-virtue and get the corrupted rune, and finally return to the shrine to cleanse it and gain attributes before moving on to the next area. For the most part, this is very linear, but eventually the game opens up a little bit more as you gain access to a sailboat. The world itself is not that large, and the boat is there mostly to unlock several new areas, and give you a little bit more freedom in backtracking to merchants and such. Since the world is comparatively quite small, the game prevents the player from proceeding to certain areas by swimming by having certain areas of the sea cause you significant damage. The only real problem I have with this system is that, unlike in earlier Ultima games with a similar system, in Ultima 9 there is no clear visual distinction between areas that are safe to swim in and areas that are not. Later, you also receive the Orb of the Moons, which allows you to perform a ritual to summon one of the otherwise unavailable moon gates and travel to any of the previously cleansed cities. Before the game opens up and gives you control of the ship, the Guardian takes control of your ship and sails it to the Isle of Turfin, where he has set up his stronghold. Here he taunts you once more, demonstrating how you cannot hurt him, and all of the damage you would inflict on the Guardian is instead inflicted upon you.
Do you understand yet? Do you see that you can't hurt me? All of your energy, all of the damage that you would inflict upon me is reflected back onto yourself. It's futile, Avatar. You can't hurt me. You can't win.
Confused and concerned by this revelation, you continue on your journey. The corrupted cities and their troubles are one of the best parts of the game, and are unfortunately relatively short experiences, as most of the time you spend restoring each of the virtues is taken by the dungeons, each of which has its own theme and style of puzzles you need to solve. As the story progresses, you also find out that the corruption of the virtues and that of your companions into Wormgard is not the only plan the Guardian has in motion. Instead, the final plan he has is to draw the moons together, crash them, and finally destroy the entire realm. This obviously needs to be prevented, but how, since you cannot harm the Guardian directly? The solution to this problem becomes evident very late in the game, when you find out that the Guardian is in a way a reflection of your evil side. As learned in Serpentile, the universe relies on balance, and as you shed your evil side when you became the Avatar in Ultima 4, that part of you had to go somewhere, and eventually it manifested as the Guardian. Since, in a sense, he is a part of you, he cannot be harmed without harming you. So, only one solution seems viable: the ultimate sacrifice, where you destroy not only the Guardian, but also yourself at the same time. To be able to do this, you first need to cleanse all of the shrines, restoring the virtues to Britannia, and simultaneously restoring your companions to their old selves. Then, as your companions bring the cleansed runes of the virtues into the bases of the columns, you must take the sigils and infiltrate the Guardian's fortress. This is an arduous task, and the most difficult dungeon so far, requiring several different puzzle-solving techniques and fighting through difficult enemies, but eventually you reach the end. Set the sigils onto their proper positions, creating an unbreakable barrier within which you and the Guardian now reside, and then you cast the Armageddon spell. The spell devastates everything within the barrier, and the Guardian and the Avatar are no more. So ends the story of the Avatar. For one last time you've saved Britannia, and now the realm has to learn how to handle their problems on their own. Ultima 9 is by no means perfect, and it's unfortunate how obviously rushed it is, since there's so much potential visible within it. The game engine itself is pretty amazing for the time. Not only does it have a day-night cycle that changes in real time and a dynamic weather system, but it's also completely open world with no loading screens to interrupt the gameplay, and where items you've moved or placed persist for the entire duration of the game. In a completely 3D game, this was practically unheard of at the time. The ability to move and interact with almost everything that became a staple of the Ultima games is still there, even if it is not quite as extensive as it was in Ultima 7 engine-based games. The fighting system is simplistic but functional, and the idea of learning new moves to use in the real-time combat is an interesting one, which expands on the action combat style of Ultima 8, but once more remains as an interesting idea, and the implementation still ends up being basically button mashing. The addition of the hotbar does mean you can quickly swap between weapons depending on the type of enemy you are fighting, and you can also quickly cast combat-oriented spells without any hassle. The audiovisual presentation is mostly fantastic for the time. The music is an orchestral recording, and while there aren't that many familiar Ultima themes, the way the themes of the cities change depending on whether the area is corrupted or not is a brilliant way of conveying your progression in the game. There are also plenty of ambient sounds that work well in creating the kind of mood each area requires, but even this system doesn't work perfectly, and there are some areas where those ambient sounds go from being mood amplifiers to being straight up annoying. This is a great example of how unfinished the game still is, even after several patches. Sometimes the game is extremely unstable, and there were a few situations where I had to reload an older save and replay significant sections of the game because a specific flag didn't trigger properly, soft-locking my progress. The game also crashed several times, and alt-tabbing out of the game meant that I had to force close the game because it just did not want to reinitialize afterwards. The most unfortunate part is that the unfinished state of the game also extends to the game's story. The root of the story is, in my opinion, pretty amazing, and you can see what they were going for. And all of those ideas are amazing for the final part of the story of the Avatar. Ultima 9 has a massive amount of references to older Ultima games, especially to Ultima 5. Not only is Blackthorn back, wanting to be the ruler of Britannia once more, but so are the Shadow Lords referenced multiple times. The power words used to seal the dungeons make a return as well. So many things in the game try to create this feeling that everything that is happening has a connection to the past, but the resolution to those references is undercooked within the game itself. The main idea seems to be that just as the Shadow Lords were created because of your actions, so was the Guardian, and your fates are irrevocably linked. Not only that, the idea of having an avatar in the first place was flawed, as you've already seen in multiple games in the series. So many times you were called into action and you resolved the current conflict, but that just ended up creating an even more dire situation in the future, which you were once more called in to solve. This was never the intention of the Avatar, but you were meant to be a symbol, something the people of the world could look up to and emulate. But instead you turned into a hero who is called in to solve problems, and the people forgot how to deal with their problems on their own. This is a fantastic idea to delve deeper into, but in Ultima 9 this whole theme is relegated to a few sentences said by Lord British near the end of the game. Which is also the case with a link between the Avatar and the Guardian. It's a massive shame, since the base of good ideas exist within the game. In a similar way, there are certain aspects of the game that could have been easily explained, but due to the game being cut to meet a deadline, we never got proper explanations within the game itself, such as the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom being out of the void. Sure, we're told that the Codex disappeared from the void, but are never told how it happened. It's one of those things that's likely very simple. The Guardian is a creature of the void, so it makes sense he would have taken the Codex from the void. Samhain was, in some form or another, working with the Guardian to ensure the safety of Buccaneer's Den, so he likely got the book from him. But we never actually got an explanation for this in the game. There's also the very beginning of the game that contradicts the ending of Ultima 8, and seems to be an extended tutorial tacked on for some reason. A simple way to fix this would have been to take notes from Ultimas 5 and 6 by having the Earth segment where you choose your class be a flashback to the events at the beginning of Ultima 4. Then the sequence of events where you end up on a cliff in Turfin to see the Guardian's stronghold would have made sense, since that's where you would have ended up directly after Ultima 8, as seen in that game's ending. Then there are the poorly phrased questions, some of which have gained some amount of infamy, such as,
What's a paladin?
and I can understand why these would be annoying to longtime fans, since they seem completely unlike what the avatar would say. Yes, these are most likely in the game to act as an introduction to concepts of Britannia to new players, a feature which is necessary, but these are so poorly phrased and with slight rewrites could have felt less out of character. Yet another example of how rushed many parts of the game were. But if you're able to look past the flaws, many of which are rather minor by themselves, but can feel overwhelming since there are many of those minor flaws, the game itself is still pretty damn fun. And the story, while being clearly unfinished in many parts, still has many interesting philosophical questions to ponder, as is tradition with the series, and does act as a nice little finish for the story of the Avatar. In the end, I just wish the game had had a little bit more time in the oven, since none of the issues the game has are unfixable. And in fact, there is a fan project where the purpose is to rewrite parts of the dialogue to fix plot holes, add to the good ideas the game has, and fix some of the parts which don't fit the established canon. I've yet to try it myself, so I can't say how good it is, but perhaps one day I will. All things said and done, I still enjoy the game, and I think it's gotten a reputation of being worse than it actually is. Yes, it's very flawed, but there is a lot of good about the game as well. Even if I was very confused about why there was a Burt Reynolds cameo in the game.
You did it, Avatar! When you restored the final shrine, I was given my life back.
Anyway, that is it for this time, and is the end of the Ultima series. At least for now, since there are some spin-offs remaining. Thank you to all the Ko-fi and Patreon supporters, Tama7, Zai, and Daniel Zupke. And everyone who's been watching these, liking the videos and commenting. It does mean much, and I'm grateful for all the support and feedback. Next time, I'll be looking at another series that is very close to my heart. A legendary series that began as a top-down adventure game before going into 3D, where you explore a fantasy world as a lone warrior, finding new items that allow you to reach new areas, solving dungeons with your newfound powers, and best of all, it's about vampires.